So I touched on lists earlier, and I mentioned that lists in particular are particularly useful for the kind of things that you'll be doing. You'll be using lists a lot, and dictionaries to an extent as well, which we'll also talk about. So let's just remind ourselves that lists are structures that allow us to store multiple values, multiple items of ordered data. The order matters in a list, to which we can refer later. And you'll find all sorts of uses for lists as you go through. So let me just talk about some of the basic notation for this. So if you want to create a new list, we can create a new list that's either empty and then add things to it, or we can create a list that's got things in it at the start and then we can add to it and remove stuff if we wanted to. If you want to just create a new blank list, which very often can be useful if you want to create a new empty list, and then very often you'll go through some sort of loop to then add things in. Then the way we do that is we give it the name of the list, the assignment operator, the equals, and then we open and close square brackets. Square brackets are for lists in Python. So that creates a new list called myEmptyList, but it doesn't have anything in it at the moment. So it's not a particularly interesting list at this stage. If we wanted to create a new list that already had some starting elements within it, then we can do that in exactly the same way. It's just rather than just open and close the square brackets, we can say what those elements are, and we separate each element in a list with a comma. And if they're numbers, then we write down the numbers. If they're strings, we need to put quotation marks around, either single or double, whatever you prefer. If they're booleans, we have to put capital T on the true and a capital F on the false, and no quotation marks. But you can store all sorts of things, as I say, within a list. Now, if we want to add an item to a list, we can use something known as the append function. Now, this uses let me just say this first. So the append function, as you've seen so far, we open our brackets and we put in any inputs, and the input to an append function is the thing that you want to add to the list. So if I put append 2 here, that would add the number 2 to the end of the list. Okay, and it'll always add it to the end by default. Now, this thing here is the first time, and I checked in my slides, this is the first time you have thus far encountered something known as dot notation. You are going to see this all of the time moving forward, and it can trip people up a little bit trying to understand what this says. So far, you've seen functions like this, where we just say print, and then open brackets, and then any inputs we need to put in. That's an example of calling a function. This works, print works, because print is an inbuilt core function in Python. Okay, so when you install Python, print comes with it. Sometimes, though, we need to call a function that is a function not of the core Python, but of something that either lives within core Python or, as we'll see later, is from a totally separate package. And the way we do that is using something known as dot notation. So what this says, you'll see that in this example, we've called the append function, but we've got the name of the list that we've created here, and we've put a full stop, and then we've called the append function. What this says is that I need you to call the append function of a list object. Now, you'll remember when we talked about object-oriented programming and principles of programming, we said that we had this idea that there are classes and then there are objects which are instances of those classes. This is basically what's happening here, and you'll see when we get on to the object-oriented programming in Python in a couple of weeks, you'll see more examples of this. But you're going to run into it before we get to that stage. What this is, when you've created a list here, there is a list class within Python which defines what a list is. And what we've done here is essentially created an instance of a list. And we've got this nice little shorthand that we can use the square brackets because it's an inbuilt Python thing that allows us to instantiate one of those things a little more easily. But that's what we're doing, creating an instance of the list class. So now we have a list object called myList. By using the dot notation, we're saying, give me something within that object. And so that's a way. Remember, in object-oriented programming, we talked about objects have things that they carry with them, information. That's the attributes, and things that they can do, which are the methods, which are, remember, just another name for functions. So what we're doing here is we're accessing the append method of the list class. And we're doing that on our particular instance of the list class, myList. So we've created a type of list, we've called it myList, and on that list, I want to use, because a list is an object, I want to use the append method of my list object. And this method will allow us to add an item to the list. So when you see the dot here, it basically means use this, the thing after the dot, that belongs to the thing before the dot. That's basically what dot notation is. Okay, and I flag this up now because you're going to start seeing this all the time, and you might be thinking, well, hang on, I've called a print function down here. I didn't have any dots in it. Why have I suddenly got to put dots? Some things will have dots in them, some won't. It's because there are some things that are methods of sort of core Python functions, and other things which are methods of either core Python classes or external things that you've brought in. So that's what that says. And actually, as you'll see later in the course, you can have subsequent dots, so you could access. Let's say you might have a list which then contains also another object as one of those lists, and then you might use a dot notation to get to something within that. But every time you say dot, it's kind of like going down a level into that thing and accessing something about that object. In this case, a method. So mylist.append open brackets 2 will add the number 2 to the end of my list. So exactly, it's much simpler. It's as simple as that. But I just wanted to flag that up, just so that people, if you're new to Python, you probably won't know why there's a dot there. That's why it is, and why you're going to start seeing it a lot.